Welcome to another video, this time on technical debt. Technical debt is a metaphor coined by Cunningham. Technical debt has, as a metaphor, has been expanded and extended by many people into all sorts of areas, and it's now ambiguous. And many people believe it to be a metaphor steeped in all sorts of additional things that the original didn't really have. Now, I'm going to make an attempt at distilling technical debt down to what it means and remove all the other things that popular culture has added to it, and hopefully in an attempt to bring the metaphor back to somewhere near the original intention, and that is to give us a word and a way of thinking about something and have some kind of benefit. So let's have a look. The first thing I want to say is what it's not. Technical debt is not deferring a decision. So often I hear that people say, well, you know, we're not going to do it like this, we're going to do it like that, and we'll deal with that later. Oh, where's our technical debt? Well, it's because we didn't do it like that, we did it like this, and now we're going to do that later. That's technical. Well, that's not. That's just decision making. Right? That's decision, right? We have a word for that. No metaphor is needed to say that you've made a decision. Okay. The next thing is choices you make. Now, similar to a decision, but along the way, you make certain decisions. Now, deferring a decision is leaving it until later or making a particular action, but choices you make are decisions you're making right now and formulating a pathway that you're traveling on. That pathway is not technical debt. We already have a word for that. You're making choices. Right? And part of designing and writing code is basically making choices. Why would you come up with a metaphor to describe decision making or delaying a decision or any choice that you make in standard coding and designing and coding operations? Technical things that are not done correctly, such as corner cutting, this isn't technical debt. We're not saying, hey, you go and make a choice that, we're going to release it now, and therefore we've got all these other things that we haven't done properly, but it's okay. That's technical debt. Technical debt isn't necessarily a decision you make. It could be, but this is a little bit like on the edge now. So I believe I'm on this side of the fence. I don't believe you should proactively make corner cutting decisions and call it technical debt. Call it cutting corners. That's the word. I've cut some corners. Later on, I'm going to have to repay that technical debt. I get it. But to me, it's a little bit that way. This, as I said, is on the fence. You can go either way with this one. An excuse to do things poorly. Well, this I'm not on the fence for. On doing things properly versus poorly, if you actively and know that you're doing something poorly, it becomes an excuse. I'm doing it poorly, don't worry, I'll refactor it later. That is a problem. If technical debt is being used in that manner, with that metaphor tied in, then I would say that's wrong. That's very wrong. Okay. An excuse to not do something should be done. Right. That is very similar to the poorly. Right? So you're doing it poorly. Maybe there's something that it needs, some feature, some things, and you don't do it, right? And then you use it as an excuse. Well, I couldn't do it now. I needed to get it out the door. Once again, you could take that on board. Technical things that are done correctly, an excuse to do things. These are similar things, right? And maybe there's a line, but I really think that doing something poorly is just doing it poorly. I don't like to hear that wrapped up in the technical debt. Now, borrowing from the future, I kind of like this. It's kind of an idea that, yes, I'm kind of like later on, I'm going to spend a month correcting this, and I'm going to do it in this way now. I kind of see that. That's a good thing to do. Perhaps in business, perhaps it's necessary to get something out and sort of not complete a particular area, but then, file it off correctly and sort it out so it doesn't be a problem. Make sure it's valuable, that sort of thing, and then we'll deal with it. But then you have to write that down, you see. You've got to bring that back into your thinking. You can't leave it. Ward Cunningham, in his video in YouTube, says that it's not something that you delay. In fact, you need to get that learning, right, or that thing that you've delayed back in. You have to refactor it and change that model as quickly as possible. It's not something to be used as an excuse or something that you must leave. You must refactor that code to go from the learnings, right, to the new learnings. So stop the madness, right? There is a lot of extension added to this metaphor, such as the debt, the interest rates, how do you calculate this, how do you measure? And I think it's much simpler than that. I don't think we need to measure. This isn't something, if you said to someone, literally, this is debt, and this is the decision, and this is the delay, and I'm going to measure it. Is that a world we want to be in, right? I've delayed a decision by a week. I'm going to do it next week. Oh, what's the number? Have you repaid the debt? What's our interest rate currently? How much are we in debt for? I mean, that's just madness. I think it's much simpler than that. You implemented something with available knowledge, and this is part of the definition. You implemented something with available knowledge. Now that the goalposts have moved, there is a gap in what the code does or can do. You did not do something properly. There's a gap. You're paying interest on things that touch that code because it's not done properly. Right. In here, you did not do something properly and poorly, and these three, there is some ambiguity here. I'm not going to address that now, but just know that I'm aware of that ambiguity, and we need to look into that. What I don't care for is using more and more metaphor type things to explain this somehow in some kind of measured way. I don't think that's necessary. Ultimately, it's the refactoring we are doing, and you've got to ask why. So there's a previous understanding of the software or the model, the thing that you needed to do, the implementation. There it is. That's your previous understanding of it. You implemented it as best as you could. But now there is a new understanding. At the present time, you've discovered new things. You've discovered something fails, something doesn't work like that. There's something new. That is a gap between what was and what is. And that needs to be refactored. You need to pretend, according to Ward Cunningham, he says you need to pretend almost as if you knew all the time. That's the kind of thing we're thinking about. It's purely saying we have a gap and we need to refactor that gap out. And that time frame that we have is the interest or the technical debt that we have. It's not an active choice to make this gap. No one wants this gap. This isn't a gap we should strive for. This isn't a gap we should add. Okay, let me add a little bit more to that gap. Let me add a little bit more to that gap. That is really not the way to approach this. What I'm going to do is just bring in Ward Cunningham himself to say something about this.
If we failed to make our program align with what we then understood to be the proper way to think about our financial objects, then we were going to continually stumble over that disagreement, and that would slow us down, which is like paying interest on a loan. With borrowed money, you can do something sooner than you might otherwise, but then until you pay back that money, you'll be paying interest.
Okay, so that is reinforcing the gap and the interest you would pay on that gap. There's no reflection on creating that gap, forcing that gap. You can, but that's not really part of the metaphor. The metaphor starts with knowing that there is a gap. And I want to go through to another section here and end with that.
A lot of bloggers, at least, have explained the debt metaphor and confused it, I think, with the idea that you could write code poorly with the intention of doing a good job later, and thinking that that was the primary source of debt. I'm never in favor of writing code poorly, but I am in favor of writing code to reflect your current understanding of a problem, even if that understanding is partial.
Okay, So that's a very important point, is that you don't have to delay, you don't have to design and wait until all the available information comes and then do perfection. That's not what this is about. We understand that this is a real world. We're going to design something with available information, with available knowledge. We can implement it as best as we can. Once we've done that, and then we learn something new, there might be a gap. There is no reflection here on continuous value, on continuous deployment, or anything like that. People have conflated all these ideas. This metaphor is not giving a time frame. It's not saying you must do this every hour. It's better to do it every week. That's got nothing to do with it. It is purely your current understanding to your your previous understanding to your current understanding. Now, in the Agile world, this has moved to this kind of scenario where we're going to get feedback and we're not going to design anything really. We're going to design a little bit, but we're going to put it out and then we'll get that feedback and we'll make a change. We've got test-driven development, which is one of its primary source or claimed source of improvement is that you are doing a test and then you can write the code. So that's the documentation. And now regression and making these refactorings when you're moving from one to the other is now enforced by this test. The problem with that is that you're actually gaining or gearing up to do the refactoring on purpose. What you're doing and saying is that I'm writing a test that has my current understanding. My current understanding is sliced. It's a user story that's very, very thin. I'm going to do the test, write the code. Oh, I'm wrong. Right? Or I've learned something new. There's a gap. Now I can. So that way of working is actually doing it in micro versions where you've always got debt, always got debt. My problem with that is if you lift your head up and have a look around, you can often see, oh, hang on, I can actually jump past refactoring during these next 2 weeks and jump straight there. I could request feedback for something a month from now. And therefore, I don't need so much regression or refactoring or tests that do that refactoring. I'm doing that less. And you can check that out on my video, Designing for the Future. I think it's part 1, where I talk about how Agile is actually kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is gearing for change or making you adaptable for change, but giving you tools that induces change. So therefore, they are correct. And so therefore, you're doing change and learning how to deal with change, which is making change and so on. Very circular and eventually fine-grained, and I believe it's going to crash and go right over that cliff. But we'll talk about that at another time. Technical Debt. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell in case you want to get those videos straight away.